Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this TPA Masterclass, TPA as in the Podcast Academy. And today we're really excited to have this excellent talk. Who is your listener and how do you reach them? We're going to talk about the listener persona, which is a critical thing to know deeply about your enterprise. I definitely, before we dive in, want to thank Mark Steadman. Give us a hi here, Mark, dialing in from Birmingham, UK. Apologies
Hello.
for that bad accent. Mark is the founder of a podcast consultant and founder of Origin, who helps solopreneurs and small teams use their voice to build trust through this great medium, which we call podcasting. I also have Emily here. Hi there, Emily, also dialing in from the UK. Where's that in the UK again?
From Cambridge.
Cambridge. All right. Not Cambridge. That Michigan accent's coming soon. Emily is a brand and marketing strategist and helps early stage companies establish their strategic foundation that leads to amazing campaigns. So super happy to have you both. Before I move too much further along, I want to thank our community building sponsors, Wondery, who have helped us produce this event. So really excited to have you all here. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen and pass it on over to Emily and Mark. Mark and Emily, thank you so much for being here. Take it away.
Thank you very much. This is a real pleasure. Hello, everyone. My name is Mark, and you've heard a little bit about me. Please say hello to Emily. And what we want to do is we're going to talk about two common reasons why podcasts fail. Is that there's either an inability to find that initial audience, or there's a sort of mismatch of expectations, which can often be attributed to the first issue. And so that's what we really want to help with today, is making sure that there is real crystal clear clarity on who your listener is, how you can serve them with your podcast. There are sort of small ways of doing this. There's something called a listener story, which I work on, which is a very short sentence to help you. But what we are doing today is we're using tried and tested marketing techniques that have been working for decades, that web agencies use, branding agencies use, and that's why Emily's here today, because she's an expert in this stuff. So I'm bringing the sort of podcast domain stuff, and then Emily is bringing the real marketing knowledge. And together, what we're going to do is help work on what we're calling a listener persona, which will really get into the nuts and bolts of who you're talking to. So Emily, do you want to give us a little bit more background into the idea of the customer or the listener persona?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think we'll do our best, or I'll do my best to call it a listener persona. There are so many different names for it. So customer persona is what I'm used to calling it. If you want to get fancy, sometimes it's called a ideal client avatar. Like, there are many terms within marketing and the business world generally, of course, that can be interchanged here. So we don't have to get too worried about the semantics of it. But a listener persona is essentially, it's this fictional representation of your ideal listener, of your ideal audience. And it's this mix of details and facts and assumptions about who that person is. And it tries to make it as tangible and concrete as possible, so that you've got this person in mind. You try to make them as human and as real as possible, so that you know exactly who you're talking to and how you develop your content and what kind of tone and expression and everything else. So in a nutshell, it is that fictional representation, that fictional human of your ideal listener.
And I think the primary reason why this is really important, because it's fair enough talking about this, but like, how is this helpful? Is if you make your podcast for everyone, you effectively are sort of making it for no one, because it becomes so difficult to then speak to someone in a way that resonates with them. So what you really want to do is, when you're telling people about your podcast, you want to tell the person that goes, wow, that's for me, I need to listen to this, rather than, that sounds nice. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to work through a listener persona that I've worked through before, so I've got a little bit of inside knowledge here, based on a podcast that I created a few years ago. That when I told people about it, they went, "Ah, that's nice." And so what we can hopefully do is, in the end, we end up with someone that we can talk to, that we can say, "This, I made this for you," and when we have that, that's a person that we know is going to love it, because we don't just need numbers, we need engagement. We want people who are going to love the episodes, who are going to share the episodes, who are going to talk back to us and email us and in the comments and all that kind of stuff. Those are the listeners that we want. And by being able to talk to them directly, to find out who they are, where they live, not just in terms of geographics, but where they live on the internet, where we can find them, who influences them. That's the kind of stuff that we get really into. But what we'll also explore, which I love as well, is like what keeps them up at night. Because if we can speak to people on an emotional level, if we can help solve their problems, even with an entertainment kind of show, we're still helping people solve problems. So if we can help with that, if we can communicate that that's what we're helping with in that tiny little bit of text that we get to describe our podcast when people are looking in Apple or Spotify, if we can hook them because we know them, then we've got so much a much better chance of being able to bring them in as a listener.
Yeah, I think it's like you're saying, it's that focus of your message, that you know where to focus it, how to focus it, when you know your listener. Because if you've got that focus, then you have that opportunity to be consistent. And then you have that opportunity to be memorable, which is really what brand building is all about. Like, to just, when that listener is wanting to listen to a podcast or scrolling through, you want to be the one that comes to mind. And you can't do that when your message is too broad, when you have, when you're trying to serve a lot of audiences. You just need to know who you're speaking to, so that you've got the focus, consistency, and memorability, really, at the end of the day. And I think just one key point before we kind of get into developing one is the point of the customer persona is almost as much knowing who you are speaking to as it is who you are not speaking to. And you get to know, you get to have that yes, no kind of thought in your mind, where it's like, this group, other group wouldn't appeal to me because of X, Y, and Z, because you know who you would appeal to and what messages you have and so on. So it helps you know who you're talking to as well as who you're not talking to.
Absolutely. So yeah, should we dive in?
Yeah, absolutely.
So while Emily gets set up with her screen, just to say, this is something that you can do retrospectively, or if you're starting a new show. So for me, I was doing this retroactively to look back at an existing show and rethink about my targeting and my marketing positioning and that kind of stuff. But if you're starting out, this is, when you're at the early stage, this is a really, really great time to be able to do this work.
Yeah, it's a really good point. I think sometimes with strategy, we think that we do it and then we put it on the shelf. And that's just kind of what I spend my life trying to advocate against, because I think that these kinds of personas and strategy at large is meant to be an evolving process. It's meant to be an evolving thing. We change, our audience changes, the industry changes. So yeah, this can be done at any time in the process. Of course, the more clarity and focus you have at the beginning, the easier things are down the road. But this is something that can be revisited and refreshed along the way. So it's not a one and done kind of situation. So can everybody see the kind of screen slide presentation here? So we have Alex here. So these are just some slides that I often work through with clients to go through what that persona can look like. And it's really just a discussion and a dialogue like we'll have here, where we're just working through it together. And the fun part of it is that you don't always know where it's going to go, where you'll end up. I think the more open you are about that, the better, because you don't want to go in just like with this preconceived notion of who this person is. Sometimes you might be thinking of an example that you have in mind, but don't be too tied to that. If that helps inspire it, that's great. But just see where this can go. And it's a fun exercise. I think when I do this with clients in a workshop, it always takes longer than we think it will, A, and B, it's a really fun conversation. So Anything else you want to kind of give as context, Mark? Or
no, I think that's great, and obviously, I'm seeing some questions in the chat, so do keep those coming, and we'll get to answer those at the end if we don't answer them as we go. So yeah, brilliant.
Perfect. So we have this person named Alex, who is, I don't know much about Alex, so we get to just kind of discover that as we go. Mark, so what we're going to do is really just walk through this. We won't get through all of it. We'll probably do this in it's certainly an expedited version of how I would normally go through this process, but just to kind of give a visual of what this actually looks like in practice. So first and foremost, in any kind of persona, just to kind of ground it and give it some context, it's really nice to go first with the demographics. They're often those easier questions to answer. It's, if you were doing a LinkedIn and Instagram, any kind of campaign where you were targeting your individuals, these are some of the pieces of information that you would need to know. So we kind of start with that to ease into the persona process. But in your mind, what's kind of the age, gender, family life, or situation that we have for Alex?
So I think we have a 35 to 40-year-old male, identifies as male. He is married with a kid on the way. He is, I think, a project manager. And so he spends his time sitting at a desk, and maybe sometimes he wants to spend some of that time at listening with headphones. But he's on about 30 to 35K. He's a little bit of a nerd.
I guess that's pounds for all of our American side.
Yes, I think it probably would be.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. So
$40 to $45 maybe US.
There, I would say. Yeah.
It's changing too much. I don't like it. How much the currency is fluctuating.
I know. Yes, indeed. So in that sense, like when we talk about that kind of salary range, like we could put kind of that numerical range there. It's also about like, what does that mean for him? So it's like, is he financially stable? Is he still like, is it month to month? Is it like what are his thoughts and kind of feelings around his financial situation?
I think he's never going to, because we talk about having a kid on the way, and I think he's both him and his partner are never quite ready for that. So there's still a sense of we're having to save here and there. We're having to watch the pennies. It's maybe they between them they earn enough, but it can be a little bit hand to mouth sometimes because they don't have that they don't have a big nest egg to focus on, because they bought a house or a flat or apartment 5 years ago, and they're still dealing with some of that kind of stuff.
They have responsibilities, and
they do.
It's more real.
And about to have more.
A kid comes along, absolutely. I'm just gonna say responsibilities are intense. That is not the truth.
Yeah.
So what I would do here is actually, so we've got an in summary kind of statement, which yes, I put at the very beginning, but I also ignore that until the very end because I do, as I'm scrolling through, I want to know like what those 3 to 5 sentences are that really encapsulate this person. It's where you can also infuse some personality as well as just kind of bring it all together so that it's not just fact, fact, fact. This is about Alex, and here's his bio, here's who he is. So we would come back to that. And that takes a little copywriting and finesse. So we might not get back to it today in this session particularly, but it is an important one to come back to because it really gives you that summary that you can kind of just, it's easier to remember from there on in.
Can I quickly check in with y'all in terms of like what the name or the general description of the podcast is, or are you saving that later in the presentation? My
No,
apologies.
that's a great point.
Very good point.
So yes, this is a podcast called List Envy, and that's List Envy, and it is where myself and a guest come together and we build a top 5 list on a topic that the guest chooses. It's usually something that I don't know much or anything about. And so I will do some research and I come back and I present my top 5, they present their top 5, and then we try and meld them together. So some of the topics have been top 5 women authors, or top 5 female literary characters, I think was one, top 5 films about hacking, that kind of stuff. So it can be fairly broad in topic, but usually quite sort of light and funny. And so that this is a show that's no longer producing episodes, but I chose it because I think it's a prime example of what a lot of people end up with in that kind of entertainment format that has a broad appeal. But we often sort of suffer from not narrowing down. So yeah, thank you for that.
Very good point. Absolutely.
Got so excited about the person, we forgot about the actual thing.
Actually, like
All right.
what we're here, what they're listening to.
We're pros.
Very important point. So, so, how would we describe their lifestyle? So we've talked about like their kid is coming. He's a project manager, isn't he? What the lifestyle can seem vague in some ways, and sometimes I do come back to it. But do you have kind of a sense of how you would describe the life he's leading?
He is a work to live person. So he's not, he will do all right at his job and he will want to sort of rise up a little bit. He doesn't want to be bored, but he's working so that he can spend time with his partner and they can go on vacation and pay for all the subscription services to all the Netflixes and the HBOs and those things. And so go out and explore new bars and that kind of stuff. So they're still into using that time while they can, to go out and enjoy a little bit of nightlife. And that sort of thing.
Yeah. So it's not just like there's the day job but it is potentially a 9 to 5 that then enables all the rest of life.
That's it. Yeah.
And as I would be going through this, like it's a very stream of thought kind of process. Like the process here of putting this persona together does not have to be a polished one, especially just through this kind of discussion. You don't need to overthink it too much. You don't want to overthink it because then you're going to get a bit bogged down in some of the details. I would always say just like have that conversation, just keep the flow going. And you can always come back, polish, refine. There's a few versions of this, etc. But especially when you're just brainstorming, the more you can just go with it, the better. So no need for this specific kind of nuance and making sure you're wording things correctly and so on, all to be kind of polished later. So perfect. So yeah, we've got Alex. He's a work to live. He's wanting to get the most out of life, and that's not necessarily tied to his job. That enables the rest of it for him. So I get him. I can picture people like that. It's like the more that you get into this, the more you can kind of get inspired by other people as well, where that triggers someone in your mind. That's not.
I've got fairly specific people that I'm thinking of that are not named Alex, but absolutely.
Yeah. Totally. So then, and this gets more specific maybe. So then for actual characteristics, instead of describing them, I often like to put them on a spectrum like this, because so much of life is on a spectrum. So much is, you're not one thing or the other, and Alex might very well not be. The other angle here, which we can get into in a little bit, is if you have multiple personas, it's also really nice to be comparing them on some similar criteria like this, so that you can almost like plot it and have, we'll put dots as to where they land on these spectrums here of introverted to extroverted, for example. But you can understand where Alex would be as opposed to Sam on another persona. So you get to compare that. So in terms of Alex, where would you say he falls on the range between introverted and extroverted?
He definitely skews more introverted. I think we're talking sort of, mostly 40% of the bar, I think, covers sort of introverted.
So yes.
Yeah. That's it.
Okay. And then, right. So when we think about scattered versus organized.
I think he's a little bit further along in the bar, so maybe to sort of 50-60% there, I think. He's, as a project manager, his work is fairly organized, but I think, when he comes home, he's like, I don't want to organize quite so much.
Yeah, like how organized is their kitchen? Like how clean is their kitchen, would you say?
Ooh, clean.
Does that not work? Yeah, clean.
Clean, but possibly disorganized,
right.
And they haven't quite figured out the working areas. So sometimes there are devices where there should be preparing other things.
They have a junk drawer too.
Yeah.
I mean, very
much.
But absolutely, yeah. And then just flying through some of the others, how big picture is he versus detail oriented?
He's more detail. Yeah, quite a bit more detail orientated. Yeah.
Perfect. And then insecure versus self-assured. And I wouldn't say sometimes insecure can feel really can feel negative. I wouldn't take it as a negative or a positive. It's just where would he fall on kind of that confidence spectrum?
Yeah. No judgment here. I think in real life, I think he's a bit more insecure than he would project, than he wants to project.
Yeah.
But, like many of us.
Yeah, absolutely. So he knows how to kind of pay it off or kind of, conceal some of that. But ultimately, there is a little bit of insecurity there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which I actually think we get to in if we have time for it, when we get into some of the deeper stuff, we actually get into where some of those insecurities are, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah, I might actually jump over, just in conscious of time there, because I think we've got spheres of influence. Oh, I do like spheres of influence. So let me just
I think for our purposes, I think it's a really valuable one to get into. So yeah,
absolutely. So when I say spheres of influence here, I want to know both who they are influenced by, because I want to know who they're listening to, no pun intended with podcasts, but who they're listening to and who they have, again, another pun, in their ear, but bear with me, who really does influence them on a day-to-day basis, both in real life as well as in any media that we do see. And who do they influence, I think, as well, is a really important question. What kind of scope and capacity do they have, or influence do they have? So let's start with, who is he influenced by?
I think he does listen to podcasts, so he's into sort of entertainment-y, tech-related kind of podcasts. So maybe a bit of tech news, probably veers more towards some of the higher end, bigger sort of audience podcasts at the moment. He's not delved into much of the indie space. Maybe there's one or two there, but yeah, some of the slightly bigger podcast networks, that's what he currently listens to, and that's where he gets his news and also a sense of his opinion about things from, because he's triangulating his opinion from a few different places to figure out what he's going to like, because he's a big pop culture media consumer.
Yeah. Wonderful. Is there anyone in his personal life that he's influenced by, who would really respect their opinion? I
think he loves his partner, but his partner is not a sphere of influence in that regard, realm. In this particular realm. Yes. And so it would be drinking buddies. I think maybe there's like that one person at work that has the good recommendations for things. But yeah, there'll be a couple of mates, a couple of friends, maybe from college or whatever, that he still keeps in touch with. Maybe a couple of people he's met on the internet.
He sounds like a quality over quantity kind of guy.
Yeah, I think so.
Right? Okay.
Yeah.
And so then, is it that same group of friends that he would then influence in return, or who else would he have influence over?
I think so. I think there's also like I like this idea that um with the in-laws, like there's some people within like his partner's family that are really interested in, because I am this person to a degree. Like I have pretty good TV taste, so I'm often speaking to other people in, family members or whatever, and giving them sort of TV recommendations. And I think Alex has kind of got the same. And again, he's swapping these recommendations with some of his close friends, his sort of college buddies. He's trying to get his partner into some of the things that he likes. I think he's maybe on Twitter, but is probably contemplating a move away to Mastodon, maybe. And so there will be a following there that he'll be speaking to. Maybe some. If we say he's closer to 40, then he's possibly still on Facebook, and he has some Facebook friends as well that he's influencing as well.
Yeah, very true. Yeah, it's looking at, the listeners in your audience, their reach, how so much of this, like how many times have you recommended a podcast to a friend, be like, oh, I listened to this, it was great. You need to share it. And you just have to you want your close circle to, to be flying that flag along with you. So it makes total sense. And their reach, their channels is all relevant here, certainly. Okay, so I'm going to skip, I think, communication channels, but that would be a sense of, how would you be able to communicate with them, as well as where are they digitally online?
Yeah.
What do they use? What do they like? What do they not use? You mentioned Facebook, because, he's approaching 40, so he might not be on TikTok. He might be, but he might not be on TikTok, but he is still on Facebook.
I reckon he consumes TikTok in the way lots of people my age do, in that it comes through Twitter or somewhere else. Like people have downloaded TikTok videos and put them elsewhere. Yeah. I think he's in Discord. He's got a Slack work. He's got a work Slack, and maybe he's involved in a sort of a hobby-based Slack. But I think it's probably more likely he's in a Discord community or two that might be to do with gaming, or might be to do with a podcast community. Maybe he pays for a Patreon for a particular podcast, and that gets him into a Discord to chat about things as well. So he's got that kind of thing. So it's sort of text-based microblogging. So whether that's Twitter, Mastodon. I think he might sort of browse a couple of the others, but he's kind of just lurking. He's not like an Instagram influencer or anything.
I like your point about that text-based, those text-based channels, and that puts that gives those few come to mind immediately. So
words are his thing.
Yeah. He doesn't have an Instagram grid. Doesn't need it.
No.
His wife might, but not him, not Alex. So, all right. So then moving along to some of the psychographics here. So we did our demographics first, and then we've got some of those characteristics and kind of descriptors. But then I also want to get into, and this is kind of some of the heart of a persona, as to what is important to them? What do they value? What do they care about? And then also what challenges are they experiencing as the next side of that? So what would you say Alex is working to in life? What does he value in life?
Ooh, I think he's a fairly short-term thinker. So that, as we've said, some of that's going to change. But right now he's still a little bit living in the moment. He's not thinking much past the next 5 years.
He's that'll come.
What was that? Sorry.
I said he's pre-kids. Right now it's about the immediate, the short term.
Absolutely.
All of that will come in a little bit.
That's it. And there's maybe a little selfishness there yet at the moment. He will learn. But he's still looking out for him and his partner, I think. I think he wants to be sort of stable and comfortable. He doesn't intend to be the sole provider, so he's not right now, and so there will be that discussion. I think he wants to have. He wants to know that his job is sort of serving him, and he's earning enough, and he's moving. He will have his own sense of what he is entitled to at work and what he feels like he's earned. Like he's not entitled, but like yeah, and so he'll be tracking that. He'll be thinking about, oh, I should be asking for a promotion, at this point of view. I think he's not a settler.
Yeah.
So I think that sort of progression is important. And he's also now, because of his situation, he's starting to maybe think a little bit more about that. But again, it's only really so that it serves the family rather than him having like any big career dreams.
For more like comfort and freedom,
stability,
or
stability. Freedom
rather than financial
flexibility to a degree.
Rather than his goal is not to become the
CEO.
Okay. I like it. Okay. So then when we think through problems, I like to distinguish between the external problem, and I would describe that as what would he talk about at the water cooler? Like, what would he be open to telling? What would be visible problems to the outside world? And that would be that we could assume. And then it's a matter of going kind of that one layer further of then what are the internal problems? And really, and I like to think about the facts, like what wakes him up at night? Like, what does he think about when he's falling asleep, where he's actually feeling that little bit of vulnerability and fear or worry? Like, what is that as the internal kind of heart of the problems versus what those external problems are, which are important and well and good and often really crucial for our brands or our podcasts. But we like to kind of look at those two layers of it. So externally, water cooler chat, he's at the pub with his friends. Like, what does he say? What would he claim his problems to be?
I love that question. What would he claim his problems to be? That's such a great revealer. I think he's complaining right now that he's got 4 or 5 different TV subscription services, and there's only like 1 or 2 good shows at the moment. And so he's like, oh, what do I do with all, or maybe that there hasn't been a decent PlayStation game out in a while, or the adaptation of The Last of Us isn't living. I mean, Jesus, if he thinks the adaptation of The Last of Us isn't living up to his expectations, then he's a monster, and I don't want to know him. Sorry, I got a little bit carried away. Yes. So, so I think he's talking about TV things, and there's a little bit there of wanting to be having a zeitgeisty conversation. I think that's important. Some people are not worried about plugging into that stream, and I think he is to a degree, because, and this probably morphs us maybe into the internal stuff, is that he derives some of his value from his opinions about pop culture or media or those things that we do in our spare time. Because he derives so much fun from those conversations at the water cooler, and maybe he's holding court a little bit, and he's spouting off. When we looked at this before, we came up with some quotes that Alex might say, and I think the first one that came to mind is, "Don't get me started." Like, I'm going to go on one of my rants. He's sort of with a lot of fun. With fun with it, and so I think that maybe that gets us too much of the internal thing, but And
this is where, as you can, like, if you can see, like, I'm almost hopping around in different areas of the persona, because you get into something and you're like, oh, that's something that they value as well. So like, we need to go back to that, or this isn't a linear process, which is only forward looking. You get to kind of tweak here and there. I love the line of "Don't get me started," and that's the kind of thing that I would pop back into the summary as well. Like, we're looking at Alex as a whole, it just like encapsulates it and makes it a little bit more human and live. So I just want to record it here to make sure that can be referenced later. So I love it. Okay, so we've got our external problems, but so then almost now taking that one step further of like, okay, that's what he's okay on the exterior with, like those are his claim to be problems, which they are. But now what also internally is going on for him, and what would he worry about at night?
I think the word belonging is the big one that comes up for me. is he wants to feel like he belongs. He
Mm.
wants to feel like he adds value, and therefore that's what makes him belong. It's not just about what he's interested in, but it's can he bring value to his friends and to his partner, and it's those two things I think is maybe there's that question of, am I enough? And do I belong? And that's where some of that, he's not a try hard, but he's putting in the effort with that sort of that persona of himself, that version of himself, the water cooler version, because he wants to belong. He doesn't want to be cast out because he doesn't know, he hasn't seen the latest Star Wars series.
Yeah, it's his way, it's his almost language of connection, of pursuing relationships, of putting into it. It's through like, here's what I have to give, hoping that it's well received, hoping that people people can kind of appreciate that, and then welcome him in a sense.
He if you asked him outright, he would say, I don't need people to like me, but he's a human being. Of course he does.
Of course he does. Absolutely. And does he? Definitely. All right, Amanda, I just see a hand up. Do you want anything you want to add here?
I just wanted to, I think this is really riveting. And I just, this was just a little heads up that we have a bunch of questions that we'll be moving into, just in case folks are wondering about that in the Q&A. And really, I actually wanted to bring quick attention to the question about translating this into helping your audience growth.
Yes. Absolutely. So, I will keep that in the back of my mind very quickly now, so that we address that.
I think here with this next piece, again, like a really expedited view of kind of how we would go through some of those psychographics. There's a lot more to dig into there, but something that, you would just take a little bit more time with in a usual context. The next phase that I would really recommend with a persona here is thinking through how it ladders back to you. So it's all well and good to have all of these details, and like it's, step one and a big step of that process. It's really important, but so what, in a sense, like what that person, like what would make them then be attracted to me? Why would I enjoy working with them? Or why would I want to have them as a listener? And ultimately, what problem do we solve for that person? So it's all thinking through. It's like with that persona completed in terms of their details, it's where you come into the equation. And so I just think it's a really important piece to have. I don't think we necessarily need to go through that right now, unless there's anything you would want to flag here, Mark, or anything you'd want to reference.
I think very quickly the problem that we're solving for Alex, because I think this hopefully gets us into some of the stuff around audience growth, is Alex wants to, as we've discussed, Alex wants to be the person who has the good recommendations for things. And so, because a show like List Envy is all about what is the best of these things, one of the things that we did, what's important is Alex is curious, and so he's open to new things. One of the first episodes that we did on this show was looking at competitive beatboxing, and this opened up a whole new world for me. I was absolutely, like, now I have opinions about competitive beatboxing, and I'm thrilled about it. And so that kind of stuff, it means that there's an interesting danger here in that Alex might not want to share that he gets all the good opinions from listening to this podcast, but that's maybe a fun problem for us to discuss. What's important here is the problem that we are solving for this, for Alex, is that you're going to come away with some stuff that you can bring to your friends that they have never going to considered, never going to have considered before.
New angles, new info, consolidated data, almost consolidated recommendations that you're doing a lot of the work for him. He's going to vet that and check it because that's who he is. But he's got
some context. He knows, like, because we've got 5, but then he also knows these other things that we've rejected, and he knows why they didn't make the top 5. So he can already go in pre-armed with some opinions.
Yeah. So you're giving him some time back, and you're giving him some content to work with.
Yeah, and a little bit of authority and credibility, maybe.
Yeah, I like that.
And so this is the kind of stuff, we wouldn't call it out overtly in a description, but that's the kind of stuff that we'll be referencing using Alex's language. We want to use the language that he uses to talk about this stuff. In our description for our podcast, we would be talking about the fact that he's got something that he can bring to the water cooler or to the next stand-up meeting.
Yeah. And I would say, just to end on this with the actual example, we've mentioned that you could have multiple personas here because it's not just one linear individual person. You could very well have several. I would personally recommend limiting that to 2, 3. 3 would be my max. I'd get a little nervous any more than that. But I think that's all well and good, as long as you kind of come back to this question of, what do they all have in common? Like, when you can see all of them up on the wall, like, what is that thread that links them through? Because then that is what you build your brand off of in all of your messages. Like, that is the common thread throughout which that your brand can evolve and grow on. So I think multiple personas, no problem. Just make sure you analyze what they all have in common and how they come together.
Absolutely. And I think to look into the audience growth thing, I think it's such a key point here is what we're talking about at the beginning is knowing exactly who that is. And then if you want to talk about how you grow that audience, the best way to do that is to be on other podcasts. And so you can now start to think about, what are the other shows that Alex listens to that he likes? And yes, we've discussed in this case that they might be slightly bigger network shows that it might be harder to get on. But what about the tier below? What can you do? How can you add value to that audience so that you can then appear in his sort of feed, and then you can start to speak kind of directly to him and tell him about the podcast that you've got. So that would be my key here, is use this in everything. Use this when you're jumping into, if you're familiar with techniques like targeted daily engagement, which is how you communicate on social media. Think about the language that you use when you're communicating, when you're replying to people, answering questions online, whether it's Quora or Facebook or LinkedIn or Twitter. When you're communicating with people and adding value to those audiences, think about that persona, think about that person in mind, because that's how you grow. Is conversely, we we often think this is about scale and about reaching this huge amount of people, but actually it starts really small. It starts about thinking about what's this handful of people? How can we then convince them to share what we have with more people like them? And so that's how the growth happens. It happens by getting really defined about that nucleus, and then things start to spread from there.
This is incredibly informative, both of you. I want to thank you so much for walking us literally through a process, or moving us through that process. I was actually following along and taking notes for myself. Mm-hmm. We have many questions submitted. Thank you, everybody. We're going to try to get to a couple of them. I saw a few upvoted. This is absolutely amazing. You did answer one of them already, so I'll dismiss it. I'm going to jump off from the top question that Shrikant submitted, and then kind of build off of it slightly, just to make sure that I'm on the same page as y'all. First off, Mark, you had such a great marketing quote. If you make it for everyone, you make it for no one. And then we also have to think, we need to make sure that we have a very specific voice that is distinguished from a very noisy, pun intended, market. And thirdly, it's also really important that there's best practices on inclusion and diversity. So even though, for example, I have nothing in common with that listener, there's certainly things that you can versus don't want to do to make sure that someone like me, who loves Nick Hornby and loves high fidelity and really wants to be keyed into all these really neat kind of diverse topics, but I might be like, that's not for me. So this is kind of a meaty question, so take your time to answer it. It definitely touches on the response for Shrikant's question about, how do you bring all of those 3 really important aspects of podcast marketing and your listener persona while remaining true and focused and specific?
I've got a thought on that myself, but Emily, is there anything that springs to mind for you? Okay. So I kind of want to pick up on the diversity and inclusion, because that was one of the first things that I thought of when we thought about when doing this originally. And I think that's where the the psychographics are way more important, I think, and Emily, please pick me up on this if you disagree, but to me, the psychographics are so much more important here, and I think the psychographics are what binds us. It's that need for inclusion. It's that need for belonging. It's that need to sort of have the right opinions and be up on the pop culture. Less that this person has to be male or male identifying, and that kind of stuff. That is really useful information because it helps us build a picture. But we're not excluding people who don't fit that demographic feature. But I think it's okay that we exclude people who don't fit that psychographic feature because we're not going to be for them. So if it's about excluding people, what we're trying to do is define that niche really based on the psychographics. That's much more important than the demographics.
Yeah. And I think that makes it less of a black and white kind of exclusion as well. Like it isn't. Like it's the fact that just because you know exactly who you are talking to doesn't mean that this wider body isn't interested, might want to tune in from time to time, but it just means that your content and your focus can be really targeted towards that person. Fringe benefits could be that a wider group enjoys it, but you're not then always trying to cater to the wider group. You know exactly who you're catering to and who you're targeting, fringe benefits that other people might enjoy. And I saw in the Q&A here where it's, there are those big podcasts, This American Life and Radio Lab, that speak to a really wide audience. I would argue that they still know exactly who they're talking to within that. I would argue that they still have their personas and that they know, because of that, exactly what their tone is like and exactly what their goals are within it and how they're going to be reaching those individuals. It's just so that a wider group also happens, but it still means that their content is consistent, is focused, and still has that. And because of that is memorable because they know their personas. So bigger group, wonderful, but you still know. It's more about you than the rest of the group in that sense.
I love that. So to empathize with our listeners in this podcast, stay true to your voice because that leads to consistency so that your listeners are very clear on what you're offering them and what problems you're solving. And then to Mark's earlier really good point, focus on the feelings. In the feelings is the universality. And through that, you can reach audiences and kind of branch off on that. Did I understand that correctly?
Yeah, that's how I see it. Yeah, and empathy is that key word. This is about trying to understand that listener. It's not trying to define and exclude, but trying to really understand and empathize with them. Yeah.
I love that. Thank you. Well responded. I gave you a real doozy of a question. It was like the $5,000 question. Thank you for that question very much. I'm going to move along here on the next upvoted question. Mark and Emily, they're asking about relating aspects of the podcast to characteristics or demographics that are not psychodemographics. Somebody commented on your listener persona, Alex's financial stability. How did that, or for example, Emily, I think you might have opinions on This American Life's financial demographics. I have a sense of that myself, but would you care to comment on that? For example, that data point and how it actually translates to your listener?
Yeah, it's for you at the end of the day. Like this is so that you can be really intentional with your content. So when you have that information point, is that directly related to the to your podcast? No, but is it, is that a helpful piece of information about just how they're feeling? Because that's where if you recall, like when we got into that, yes, sure, we have this actual salary range, but what does that mean for the person? Like, what does that then mean that they're feeling? How do they feel about their finances? Is that a stress of theirs? Is it not? So you just understand their context and their mindset so that you know what problems and worries that they have, so that to Mark's point about empathy, how you can connect with them. So it's sometimes, yes, superfluous kind of information, but it all then ladders back to what your persona is thinking and feeling and how you then connect. So it's just all those information pieces just kind of help paint that picture. And some are really detailed and specific, some are broad, but it all comes together in how you connect.
Yeah, great.
That
Thank you. And I also, coming back to Mark's point, you can empathize perhaps if you acknowledge topical things that relate to maybe the existential or lifestyle situations that your listener, you are aware, is navigating. Great question there. Brad Shreve, this is probably maybe the penultimate question we'll answer here. Really good one. I know what I want from my listeners, but I'm still struggling with the right avatar to reach my goals and where to find them. So for Brad or anybody in that space that's very relatable, what would be your first step, for somebody with an existing podcast, but they're now like, I've kind of plateaued at my listeners or not quite sure if I've got a handle of it?
My thought on that is just to be really, really curious. And so if you have people who are listening, if you've got anybody who you can gather some research, it's like when you don't know, that's okay. Like you don't want to just go and kind of build this hypothetical based on thoughts, feelings of yours, like as much as possible to talk with your audience to get that information, to be working with some data and some qualitative information. That's all really well received here. So the more that you can, if that's a possibility, if you can talk to your audience and just whether that's really practically, is that maybe a survey with an incentive for them to figure out, is it an interview or just like a one-to-one conversation of someone who you've noticed is engaged? Is it a question that you put in the comments? Like any of those kind of avenues to be able to then get some customer information would be really, really important. And that's where I would personally start, is into the research.
To add quickly to that, I think something else I would consider is, so I talk about the listener benefit. So how are we benefiting the listener? But I would also ask, how is the listener benefiting you? So what is this podcast and what is this audience? How are they benefiting you? What is it that you want this podcast to achieve for you? And I think that will help you connect the dots as well. Because if you can think of, so, I don't make list envy anymore because the people I want to speak to, the people that I can most help in my work, that's not where they are. It was when I ran my previous business. Not that everything ties back to a business, but it might tie back to what you're interested in. And so I would think about who are the people that you really want to work with and start defining it that way. Work with could be work directly with. It could be they are people the most likely to support you on Patreon, or it could be the people who are most likely to engage, and start to think about who you get energy from. And can you start really defining who that person is?
That's a really good point. It's really motivating, at least for most of us, to get good feedback and actually engage and build community through podcasts. That can be the number one thing that keeps things going for you, of course. So I appreciate that perspective. And hopefully, Brad, that answered your really good question too. I think we have time maybe for one more quick question. This will be a challenge for Emily and Mark. I think that communication channels are important here. How do we find where those audience members are? And this is a good jumping off from what you just said.
I would say, how do you find those channels? That is a $1 million marketing question. Really, it is about, through that research, aforementioned market research, that's one of the questions of like, what channels do you prefer? What are you on? There's really good demographic data here too, like in terms of who is using a TikTok versus Instagram versus Twitter and so on. Like you can go on some of that demographic data, which is also why some of those actual kind of facts and details are really useful from your persona. So you can, cater your marketing plan around that. I would say, and it's a bit, sometimes too, it is a little bit of trial and error. You don't want to get too far down one road and investment into one road before you know that that's actually not where your audience is, before you then change direction. So I would say a bit of a test and learn approach for the channels is a really good way to do it, so that you can just sense early stages of engagement, and then you back what's working here. You don't try to be everywhere, just like, we're not trying to talk to all people. With a bit of that, customer research and test and learn, then start with those different channels, different kinds of content, and just you see what has traction, and you back what's winning, really.
Yeah. Sort of listen and read as well, and Google and look for communities of interest where people are hanging out. And I think there was something there that I really keyed off of, and it's now left my head, but if I remember it, then I will jump in. But again, mostly just echoing what Emily's saying.
This was fantastically informative. And again, this live demo was such a great idea, because I think everybody can look back at this and follow through and notice any questions they haven't been asking of their own work or of their listeners. So in closing, listen to your listeners. And there's a few other really good questions here, and I'm going to invite Mark and Emily, since you're on Slack, maybe you can think about this question and respond to it over there on the TPA Slack for our members about this audio fiction show question. So I'm going to just copy it here and save it, and I'll post it on the Slack, and maybe you can respond there.
Awesome.
But this has been absolutely fantastic. I'm just going to go ahead and close this out here. Folks, if we didn't get a chance to get your question, please do we thank you for your grace. Please do consider joining TPA, the Podcast Academy. We're a 1,000 strong community of members across the globe, including the UK. We had people dial into this webinar from across the world, India. I saw some folks in France. So this is really wonderful to have you here. As mentioned at the top of this event, we have more programming in the schedule. Another benefit of being part of the Podcast Academy, to which Emily and Mark, we hope you can join as well, is the ability to directly connect with professionals across the globe who have a shared interest and or a passion to support you in your podcasting journey. So we have an event on February 27th. It's members only for TPA folks. Please do consider signing up to connect with a TPA member or 3 by the end of that that session. You will have gained at least 2 new people who share an affinity with you, who you can actually co-mentor, collaborate with, promo, show swap, and or just generally know and see at other virtual events and have collegial energy with. That is happening on, again, February 27th, and the sign up, where we collect a little demographic information about you to make sure the matching is intentional, is closing this Friday. So I want to thank everybody so much for joining us here at the Podcast Academy. Please consider joining if you're not already a TPA member. We really are eager to embrace your talents. Alone we know a little, together we know a lot, we say. My name is Amanda. I've been really impressed. You've all been wonderful. And thank you again, Emily and Mark, for sharing your really excellent insights. I really appreciate it.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, everybody.